Hi, my name is Craig Fraser from Air Syndicate, and I'm here to bring you the new custom painting video series from Asset and Iwata Media. In this series, we're going to be doing some custom painting on helmets. As a matter of fact, we're going to work on a white helmet as well as a black helmet to show the diverse different ways of masking off, laying out designs, freehand airbrushing, and stenciling graphics on some custom helmets. With the techniques we're going to show you in this video, you can take your own helmet and turn out some of the latest designs that's seen in the custom industry today. For our first helmet, we're going to work on this composite white shell. Best way to actually work on a helmet, if you can, is to get all the interior as well as the buckles and the rubber trim all removed from the helmet. That way nothing's going to interfere with your paint job. It gets really difficult masking off a lot of these components. If you can get it down to this basic shell, your paint job is going to come out the very best. In this case, this is a gel-coated shell that we prepped simply by sanding the entire shell with 600 grit sandpaper, and then we went over the entire shell with the Scotch-Brite pad to give it a nice, even surface texture. What I'm going to do before I actually start painting, I'm going to take a lint-free towel and use some pre-cleaner. I like using one of the pressurized containers to spray the pre-cleaner. This is pre-pressurized with a compressor, and I just have some DX330 pre-cleaner in it. Give it one good spray on there, and then wipe the surface down. This will get off any surface dust, as well as any fingerprints that may happen upon handling the helmet. If you've already been doing some masking on designs, it also eliminates a lot of the residue and adhesive that can really cause problems with your paint job. After getting nice and wiped down, we're going to come in and lay some 3M masking tape over the entire helmet, and then we're going to draw out the design and cut it and start out with a scallop design over the whole front of this helmet. See that I've already masked off the entire helmet using the standard 3M masking tape. This is 2-inch masking tape that is laid over in strips. You need to lay it in strips to eliminate all the wrinkles you'll get going over a three-dimensional surface. I then came in and drew in scallops symmetrically on both sides so that it would give some balance using an ink pen. Then I came in and used my X-Acto knife to cut out the design. Very important to lay out the design first with a pen before you start cutting. The best way to eliminate mistakes. You can see right here how it looks before the tape is actually peeled. It's been pre-cut. I just come in and very carefully lift the tape as I go along. The reason I say carefully is some areas, especially where the tape overlaps, you may end up having points that aren't completely cut through. If you yank off too fast, you may peel off more tape than you really initially planned on doing. Using your fingers to roll the tape off is the best way to get the tape off without leaving any adhesive behind. You can also use your fingers to run around the surface to find out if you have any loose adhesive on there. If you don't have any fingernails and you're having a hard time getting the tape up, you can always use a weeding tool, which is used in the vinyl industry, to lift up small sections of vinyl. I got just enough fingernail I can get this up, no problem. Nice thing about having an erratic shredded edge here, if you leave any tape or small pieces behind, you actually won't even notice that much. At this point, you'll give the whole design a once-over, not just to make sure there's no adhesive on it, but also make sure that all areas are pressed down, especially on the overlaps. These overlaps may appear to be pressed down quite well, but if it leaves any gap, it can create a channel that the paint will shoot up and create a lot of overspray. In an initial stage like that, a little bit of overspray is not going to be the end of the world because we're going to peel it off and we can always pre-clean it off. But if we had like about half dozen colors underneath all this masking and any of that overspray went in there, without any protective clear, that paint can get stuck on there, cause a lot of problems. You'd have to come in and maybe do a little extra airbrushing, or at the very worst, sand and respray that area again. So a little bit of precaution early on in prep is going to save you a lot of time later on. I'm going to wipe this surface down one more time with the pre-cleaner to get off some of my fingerprints and any residual oils, and then we'll be ready to spray. In this situation, I'm using a 2-stage base coat urethane designed for automotive application. Right here I got some nice lemon yellow color I'm going to be using, and it's actually been reduced twice by comparison to what it says on the can. Remember, most automotive urethanes are designed for full spray gun application. Whenever you're airbrushing, you're going to want to double the reduction, or at least experiment and find out what amount of reduction is necessary to get to flow through whatever size airbrush you have consistently for either detail or for good coverage. Consult your local Iwata dealer about whatever paint systems are available through that store itself. So I mentioned this has been reduced down twice, or double reduced, in which case it's going to settle a lot more than if it's just reduced down standard. You don't want it to settle down and pour off, otherwise you're going to have problems with the paint sticking. I'm going to be using my Eclipse CS top feed airbrush for this. This gun is designed for automotive application and has Teflon O-rings that will not wear or erode from even any solvent use. I only fill the airbrush about half full, because I'm not sure exactly how much I'm going to use. You can always add more, and you don't want to add too much and have to throw out. One habit you want to get into is never pour back from your airbrush into a bottle, because there could be contamination. You could contaminate the entire bottle of paint. Also, whenever you're mixing up your bottles, make sure you use floor-sealed plastic bottles. Again, you can get these through your Nasty water distributor. Very important to use floor-sealed, otherwise you can end up having pretty much a big blob of plastic on the table, because the paint will eat through any other types of plastics. Holding my helmet, I'm going to come in. You always want to go to one area where any form of streaking or any problems you may have will not be readily apparent. I'm going to have some darker streaks on these tips anyway later on. Therefore, if I spray something, I'm not happy with it, I don't have to erase it. I'm going to come back in with more paint later. I'm using approximately 35 to 40 psi, and I'm blending, really aiming at more of the edge of the design than the actual center. This way, any overspray is going to feather back into the tape as well as over it, and I'll get the most coverage right on the line. I'm not going full blast with the airbrush. I'm feathering the trigger back and forth to get varying amounts of coverage. I want this design to have an undulating look about it. I'm not going for complete coverage. If I was going for complete coverage, I would use a full-size spray gun, or at least the LPH50. You also, when doing this, want to make sure you have good ventilation and wear a respirator mask. I know I'm not wearing one, but that's because I have to talk. So I'm going to end up finishing this design off with my respirator mask, and when we come back, I'll have my complete coverage of yellow on the helmet. The next color we're going to go to is a transparent tangerine color. It's very important to realize I'm using a transparent candy at this stage. The initial stage was a yellow opaque. The way I paint is a process system where I use opaques first and transparent second. Reason for this is the overspray from opaques is very noticeable and can muddy up your design later on. So you want to use opaques early and the transparents later, because the transparent overspray, while it is there, is not as noticeable. It'll give you a nice gradated fade. So always start with opaques and then work along with candies. Again, these are double reduced down. It's a transparent base coat. You want to give it a good shake because it is going to settle. I never fill the airbrush all the way to the top. Always 3/4 full or less. That way you get a little agitation. You can shake. If it's all the way full to the top, it'll tend to leak out and you'll have some problems with shaking. I always like to spray a little bit into a rag first before I actually start doing the airbrushing. Just make sure it's coming out clean. It is. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to just do a light fading on the tips. Again, I work from the tips in, because if I'm not happy with the color, I can always come in and fix the tip a lot easier than a main area in here. Using my one hand as a guide to keep the airbrush at a certain height, this finger right here, I'm going to come in and lightly fade the tips. Really just go along the edges. This gives a nice sense of three-dimensional, so kind of a three-dimensionality to these scalps when they're going to be unmasked. I don't want to hit all of my yellow. I want to leave a little bit of that yellow behind. I'm doing just the tips right now. I'll kind of even come over, maybe create a little secondary line going in there, like a shadow. So it'll look like these are undulated, almost like maybe they're like it's fire or something molten coming out. It's just one thing you can do that's a little bit different than the standard scallop. Standard scalp will just be straight. We already made this kind of a shred. Now I'm just creating this undulating pattern of paint to give it even more movement. The underlying yellow, the opaque yellow, gives this tangerine candy a real brilliant base. When this is clear coat, it's really going to just jump out at you. Now, I'm actually going to fade the tips a little bit more. I want them a little bit darker because the very, very tips of these I'm going to have a real bright red. Nice thing about doing all this texturing, let's say you have some imperfections in the yellow. Airbrush textures and airbrush special effects are the best way to hide any imperfections. I was lucky and I don't have too many marks or imperfections in this design, but I'm still going to continue this pattern as I go along. Aiming right at that edge. I'm going to continue this effect as I go all around the helmet, and then we'll come back as soon as I have all of these tips at the exact same level of intensity with this candy. As you can see, I got all the little spikes of the shreds pretty much equally shaded with this candy. Nice thing about a true candy is that the more you layer it, the darker it gets, because as the colors layer and layer and layer, it'll just prevent light from penetrating all the way down to that yellow and reflecting back, allowing this to just keep on darkening and darkening without any use of black, just color. I still have this whole front area left alone, and I got these vents which act as perfect areas for me to come in and do a little bit more of the spraying. One thing you're going to know when airbrushing, you're going to come across neat designs you're going to want to elaborate on. This started looking almost like fire to me, so I'm going to make it look like some kind of a realistic fire, some streaks are coming out of these vents. I just kind of streak it away from the vent, almost like a smoke effect. And these are just very small little dagger strokes I'm doing with the airbrush. And I want to get these vents nice and dark. This effect is very similar to realistic fire, except I'm going over a light background with dark instead of going over a dark background with a light color. I'll also come from the bottom up also, continuing that same streaking effect. And I want to duplicate that same fire I did there on this side over here. Sometimes the best way to do this, if you're doing a lot of helmets, is to actually set up a mirror across from you. That way you can look at a mirror and you'll see not only the exact reflection of what you're doing, but it'll be reflected in the same position this one is. Since both sides of the helmet is symmetrical, if I had a mirror on the other side, I could exactly duplicate this just by eyeballing it back and forth. Neat little trick you might want to use sometime, used by a lot of professional helmet painters. I'm going to darken this up nice in the center and kind of bring the fire up the nose. And bingo, no more little goober in the yellow. It's all gone now. Hit it from the top, hit it from the bottom. You know what that'll do? Take care of whatever angle you have on both sides of those vents. And look at it again from the front. I'm going to bring a little bit more of this orange all the way down into the yellow here. A lot of these helmets will have visors. This one I don't believe does. This is the kind that you would wear goggles inside of. It has a visor. You're going to want to put the visor on here and make sure, because some visors tilt, whatever effect you do here, you're going to want to make sure the effect matches the visor. You look at a lot of professional helmet designs, oftentimes they're not going to have a lot of changes between here and the visor because they want to keep it simple, depending on where the owner puts the visor at. If I don't have a visor, I can pretty much go at it. Hit these two sides also. Even though it's probably covered with rubber, again, remember what I said, always safe. Better safe than sorry. That's about all the fire effect I want to do. I'll show you a neat little trick you can do to add to this. Not changing the color of my airbrush, I'm almost out anyway. Add a little bit more. Fill about halfway full this time, a little bit more than halfway, and I'll show you why. I'm going to take a little bit of what's called ice pearl. This is a product made by House of Color, and it is actually a, put my airbrush down so I don't splatter this stuff everywhere. It's actually a micro-encapsulated, very, very small little glass beads. This is very similar to what used to be called diamond dust back in the day, which is ground up mirrors, which is very dangerous to spray because they had very sharp edges. This stuff are like little bitty glass beads, almost so small you could hardly see them, just little sparkles. But since they're glass, they're transparent and they don't appear muddy over light surfaces. You want to be real careful when spraying pearls on light surfaces because some pearls will actually come across as being a little on the dirty side. Make sure my fingers are fairly dry. I'm going to take just a little pinch of this. Just a little pinch inside there. Not much. A little pinch. You'll know when you have too much. It'll settle to the bottom and clog your airbrush up real nicely. So I'm going to shake it up real quick. Put it off to the side for now. This away. Don't breathe heavy or sneeze unless you want this whole place to look like scene from some Disneyland movie, because you'll just have, it'll be like a huge snow globe in here. Notice I put my finger over that little air hole every time, because otherwise paint will come out. This vent is very important to stay open. If that vent ever seals, you'll have the pleasant experience of this cap blowing off, hitting you in the face. So you want to make sure it's always open, but always put your finger over when you're spraying it. I'll show you the effect I'm going to do. Spray it in here, make sure it's spraying out okay. I don't know if you'll see this effect in the video camera. You can kind of see the sparkle a little bit on that rag. I'm just going to use this to tint the tips of these. Now when clear coated, because it's a transparent candy, you'll see a nice shimmer of sparkles at the tips. Give a real cool look as you walk around the helmet. It'll just kind of shimmer and shake. Now I want to hit all the tips with this. As soon as I hit all these tips, I'll change a color and we'll come back and fade the very ends to give that real bright red look I talked about. After I've gone over all these tips with that transparent tangerine color and the ice pearl, I mixed up another concoction, kept the same paint inside my airbrush, but came in with a little bit of opaque red. It's reduced down, so you can take an opaque color and even reduce it down and make it semi-transparent. In this case, I just wanted like a real blood red that had a little bit of that tangerine, a little bit of that pearl still in it. And this way, I can come in and hit the tips, get a nice bright red tip going on this design. Maybe carry a little bit of the airbrush and back a little bit further, not too much. Since it does have a little bit of that ice pearl in there, I'm still layering ice pearl in. If I use too much of that opaque red going in, I'm going to kill whatever ice pearl and tangerine faded back here. I use this real bright red mixture just on the tips of all the shreds. Real fast process, just the tips. Don't want to cover it, just want to tint it really. And I save a little bit left over for the front areas here. A little bit up in there for the fire, just a little bit on the grill. Aiming down there, aiming up. Might as well, yeah, we'll hit a little bit in the center there too while we're at it. Not a lot though. Just enough to really emphasize that blood red color there. And you can see that it has a drastic color change from the very tip as it comes into that yellow. There's actually very little of the original yellow left over, just little bits here and there, and that's the effect I was really going after. Something that is just going to look like there's just hours and hours of work in it because of all the undulating colors and the different textures, but as you saw, not a very difficult effect to achieve. Put my airbrush aside for a second here. I'm going to show you some of the unmasking, how we do it. Paint's still a little bit wet, so I want to be careful, but I'm just going to come in and start peeling off the tape. Use my fingernail, make sure you get it all off. Another reason I like using the Sharpie pen or a dark ink pen when I cut out, you always leave a little bit of ink pen behind, so if anything's left behind on the very edge, it'll be like a black ink pen. If you use a pencil that's real light, you won't see some of the tape that's left behind. So we got a nice sharp contrasted edge, and the benefit of using the airbrush instead of a spray gun is you can barely feel that edge. And that's very nice, because if you feel a real high edge, you're going to see that in the clear. It's going to be real difficult to pinstripe, but it's enough of a contrast visually that when I remask this whole system off, I can see it enough to cut, because I'll be masking off all these yellow scallops and be painting this whole back section back here that is left alone. So I'm going to get all this tape taken off and we're going to get on to the next step. As you can see, I've already unmasked the entire design. You can see the way the scallops play against the white. This isn't the way the helmet's going to look in the end because we're going to have a lot of colors back here. So while this actually looks pretty dark, these are going to look incredibly bright by comparison to the dark colors that are going to be on here later. I also wiped it down with a little bit of pre-cleaner, got rid of all the adhesive and any little bits and pieces of tape scraps that were along the edge. Now before we start painting the back area, we got to mask off all of these. We could come in and go in with masking tape very carefully, lay it all in here. It would take hours, and also it would never be exactly right because of these cut marks. So we're going to use this product made by Wada called Stretch Mask. And this product right here is a pliable, adhesive-backed plastic that is solvent resistant. It's also flexible, which means you can stretch it over a curved surface. Excellent for curved surfaces like helmets and tanks and many parts of the automobile. Also cuts very good and is completely repositionable. So Make sure you handle it as little as possible. The more your fingers are on this, the more it's going to take the adhesive away. You want to lay it over the surface. I'm going to pull it down all the way towards the back. And then as you can tell, I'm going to lift it here. It may get a few wrinkles in it, but I can lift them off. I'm going to pull and stretch until I get this to lay flat. I'm not concerned about the white areas. I'm concerned about it laying flat over the colored areas. See? And then I'll come in here and pull this one in 2 different directions, stretch it. You'll get a few wrinkles here and there, but you can press the wrinkles out. Stretch this over here, stretch those wrinkles out. Keep on stretching as you go along. Wrap it around the front. Now you may be wondering, what am I going to do about this area back in here? This is all going to be cut out. I'm just making sure that it's stretched and pulled tight over the yellow area. The helmets are about the most curved surface you're ever going to encounter. So because you're going to get the most wrinkles on them. Whenever you come across a wrinkle, you can either use your fingernail or just your finger to burnish it down, which will make the stretch mask stick to itself and lock out that little, what happens, a little wrinkle is a tunnel that paint can travel through. You want to lock that out. Now, there are some other systems you can use to mask off in this similar manner. Many people choose to use fluid mask. My issue with fluid mask is a lot of times on raw base coat, when you spray fluid mask on and it dries, you can cut it out. Yes, it does go on evenly without any wrinkles, but it also has a tendency of bonding and kind of getting inside that base coat and contaminating it. You may not even know it's in there until you clear it and you can see it. Plus, even though this is taking time to do, it does take a long time for that fluid mask to dry. I'm going to go ahead and trim this excess off because I don't need any of this, and just continue layering this stretch mask around the helmet until I get the entire helmet covered. Then I'm going to come in with my X-Acto knife and cut out the design. As you can see, we've got it quite clumped up back here. This whole area is going to come off. What really matters is the areas around here that are kept smooth. These lifted a little bit because I've cut them, but we'll press them right back down after we lift it. I came in with my X-Acto knife and just basically trim these areas, actually my razor blade, and we trim these areas out. And as you can see, I can peel back. And then once you do that, you can press flat any of the wrinkles that are popping up. And this is the area we're going to be painting. This area right here is going to be all protected with that stretch mask. Be real careful when doing this. You don't want to yank off too much and have the mask pull back on you. So I'm going to get this all unmasked, and then we're going to get to spraying the background graphic here. As you can see, we've got it all nice and cut out, and all the stretch mask is laid over here. Every once in a while, especially on base coat, you're going to notice the stretch mask may lift a little bit. All you have to do is just press it back down, get those little wrinkles out completely. Stretch mask does work best over a clear-coated surface. If you've got a lot of airbrushing and a lot of overspray or designs and details in your murals, when you lay the stretch mask over it, it may not stick real well. Want to make sure you take a little bit of pre-cleaner or some water, get all the overspray off, or even hit it maybe with a coat of either SG100 Intercoat Clear or just any type of Intercoat Clear to give it a nice even surface for the stretch mask to stick to. Since we're working over a bare gel-coated helmet, we noticed a little bit of lifting in some of these graphics, and they were easily repairable here, but I didn't want to deal with it throughout the rest of the helmet. So just like any custom paint job, there's always going to be things you're going to have to modify as you go along. What we did is we left this area masked, and this whole white area here was hit with a light coat of plastic promoter, plastic adhesion promoter, designed specifically for gel-coated plastics or high-impact plastics. You can purchase this at any of your Anesti Wada automotive paint distributors. Matter of fact, when you purchase that stuff, make sure it coincides with the same brand of automotive urethane you're using. Usually the company will make the promoters, adhesion promoters, exactly the same tolerances, the same chemical makeup as the actual paint. So now I'm going to come in with some blue fine line tape and start laying out the base graphic I'm going to do down here. We're going to do a little bit of checkers on the bottom later on, and I know I'm going to have a certain panel up here that's going to be one color, and another panel and some graphics back here another color. The one thing that's going to be the same between all of these is they're all going to have a silver undercoat, and then I'm going to change the colors by applying transparent candies on top. First thing I want to mask off is this area back here that's going to be left white from my checkerboard background I do at the end. Okay, as you can see, I came in with some masking tape and just masked off this whole bottom area. Leaving the blue fine light edge to give me that clean edge between the area I'm going to keep white and the area up here it's going to be silver. I also mixed up some base coat silver and put it in my LPH 50 gun. This will give me quite a bit wider pattern of spray than my airbrush. Matter of fact, it gives me a fan pattern, which is much preferred for coverage than an airbrush. Plug the hose in here. Also going to be using a little bit of a different compressor for this, since this gun uses quite a bit more volume than an airbrush does. A little bit of a test pattern right here on the tape to see how it's doing before we actually start on the helmet itself. And normally you'd want to do this in a well-ventilated area. I'm just going to do a small amount of it for the tape right now, and then we're going to go out and put the mask on and finish up the job. I'm going to put a light tack coat over the area. You don't want to just lay it on and have it run. Just do a light tack, let it kick, and then come back over for coverage. Notice how the gun gives quite a bit larger spray area than the airbrush. I'm going to go ahead and take this outside and finish it up, and then bring it back, and we'll let it kick off for about 15 minutes before we start masking on it. Okay, as you see, we've got a nice even coat of that high metallic silver on here. You're going to have to let this kick for a little bit. Anytime you use an airbrush, the paint seems to dry very fast, so you can mask pretty soon. But anytime you're using a full-size gun, even a small touch-up gun, the amount of solvents that are in the paint and the amount of paint that's actually on there will take a little while to dry. And remember, paint dries from the outside in. So you may touch paint and it may feel, oh, that's nice and dry, and you tape it and all of a sudden it starts lifting, or it causes tape marks or tape tracks. Give your paint a little bit longer time to dry. Usually I recommend anywhere from like 15 minutes to half an hour if you're using a touch-up gun. If you're using masking tape, maybe a little bit longer if you're using like auto mask with less tack, you can mask it a little bit sooner. I'm going to come in with my fine line tape, and the way I did this line down here, I'm going to mimic the same line because I'm going to have a band, a little bit of a design in here later on, and so I'm going to save that silver for later. But right now I'm going to mimic this shape that I have here. Not measuring, just eyeballing it. If you're not sure if your tape is your paint is ready to be taped, you might want to find a little area and kind of lay some tape, pull it up. See how the tape pulls the paint right off of this plastic? That's cool, that doesn't matter. But if it does that on the helmet, you've got some problems. So I already tested this and know it's not going to leave any marks. In fact, we even use a little bit of a heat lamp to speed up the process here. Again, the repositionable fine line works really nice when you're trying to get this just right and get the balance just so. There we go. Okay, I'm going to come in now and mask off this bottom area in preparation for painting our design on the top. We're going to be doing a candy blue over this silver, and we're going to use a grid network to give kind of like that grid and three-dimensional checker look you see on a lot of race helmets today. Okay, right here you can see I came in with more masking tape, and I didn't really press it down that hard. A little bit paranoid with the fresh paint, even though it was set pretty good. Just don't want to really get this tape bound down on there. I didn't use any of the stretch mask here because I'm not going to be doing any cutting in this area. So when it's not necessary, just use the masking tape. You want to make sure you use as many different types of products as possible. Just try literally every type of masking tape that's out there and see which one works for you. There's no one product that works good for everything. Using this fine line tape, I'm going to come in and lay out a grid pattern over this helmet. And this is going to be my basis for those checkers I told you about. You probably have seen these on a lot of racing helmets, whether it be motocross or Indy or NASCAR. They'll usually fill up a patterned area. It's usually not the entire helmet because it's very difficult to get squares evenly spaced over a whole round area, but they'll find a panel and they'll do like a grid. And when you look at it, it looks real complicated, like how could they mask it off, and it took a lot of time. And usually it's actually just crisscross tape that they'll spray candy over and then sequentially remove. I'm going to get this whole grid laid out, this direction and then the other direction, and then come and start spraying and show you how you can create that three-dimensional effect very simply with an airbrush and a little bit of fine line tape. As you can see, we have the grid tape all laid down on the silver. And you want to make sure and go along and press down wherever it meets, like the masking tape or itself, because the tape will stick just fine to the paint, but oftentimes you get little lift areas. It's not as crucial on this design because a little overspray is not going to matter on this as much as it may on another design, like a checkerboard or something. But still, you don't want to be sloppy. So you've got a nice even grid pattern going here. And I've loaded up my Eclipse CS with some blue metallic. It's actually a candy blue that's got a little bit of ice pearl in it, which is a transparent pearl. Make sure that gun's spraying real good. And all I'm going to do is go over each of the blue lines I just did. I'm actually spraying right on the line. That way it gives me an equal amount of paint on both sides. See that? Creating what I call a halo effect around this taping. And you continue to do this all the way around the helmet. If you have a hard time holding the airbrush steady with one hand, you can go ahead and position the helmet in one place and then go ahead and use two hands to hold the gun. I found a nice way to position the helmet is to get one of those mannequin heads. You can put it on there and get one of those Lazy Susans, or even like just a car jack and sit the mannequin head on it. And you can, kind of position the helmet steady enough you can actually even lean on it. And make sure you get continuity. You want the grid pattern that you do to look the same over the whole design. I'm going to kind of mist this blue over the silver that's left. Now there's still some silver in this design. I'm not talking about in the centers of these squares. I'm talking about the actual lines that are masked off. That's pure silver underneath. So if you're looking at this, you see a blue thick line. That line doesn't exist. That's tape you're looking at. You have to kind of think progressively. Think of the end of the design. Think of how you're going to work with this. If you go by just what you can see, you'll probably have a hard time visualizing the end. You have to realize that I'm thinking I got silver lines all across this whole design. Okay, I'm going to come and take some Candy Oriental blue. This is a lighter version of blue than this, and it has no pearl in it. It's pure candy. And it's mixed up as a base coat, which means I took the candy concentrate, or the toner pigment, and mixed it in with a binder. You got to do this. Don't get in the bad habit of using pure candy toners and concentrates to paint with without using any binder. You can get away with it sometimes, but you might end up with some nasty lifting. That binder gives the paint the adhesive properties you need. Spray a little bit down here. See how it's a little bit more of a greenish blue tint, it's a real light blue. I'm going to fog this over the whole design now. May not look like it's doing much, but it's give me some overall, so you can see the difference between this blue and the silver there. I'm hitting it over the whole design. It's transparent, so it's going to let that underlying blue come through. I'm just doing this to slightly mute that silver, the silver squares in the middle. And I'll also go back over the lines themselves. And the drop shadow is going to be done with violet. I've seen this done with black a lot. I don't like using black if I can help it. Black can really jump out and stand out real nice in the design, but it can also kill your design if you're not careful. If you look, the violet's so dark, it'll almost appear black when you do it. Now I'm going to pick an area where I'm going to do the shadowing from. I'm going to assume the light source is from the front of the helmet. And by doing that, I'm going to come in and do this one side here and this area here, drop shadowed. Just like that, drop shadowed. I'll do another one up in this area so you can see it better. This side and this side of the blue line, drop shadowed. And that way it'll end up looking like these squares are receded underneath whatever grid I unmask later. It'll take a little bit of time for me to get this all done, so we'll come back when I get all the areas drop shadowed, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, as you can see, I came in with that violet candy and went over the whole design just on one side. I projected the fact that there was a light source up in front, and imagine these blue lines casting a shadow over there. And notice they're all on this side, and as you get to the center, I just went down the middle and then I switched sides. Gives it a nice perspective look. At this point, I'm going to come in and pull off one line of tape. Now remember, I did the verticals first, and then I did these horizontals last. So I'm going to pull off those right now. You want to be real careful on it, kind of pull it back against itself. If you pull it off and you just yank it off, you can maybe sometimes lift a little paint that may have not been fully cured. And I don't want to pull off my other blue light tape. I want to leave the one section there. Cool thing about custom painting is everyone can get the same materials, everyone can get the same tools, everyone can buy the same masking tape. But there is always a difference in the process and how you lay out masking and the sequence you do it in, and that makes all the difference in the world. Don't get all. What I got in here is the blue candy. Remember we had before, the last thing we just did, with no pearl in it. And I'm going to go right over this, spray a little here, make sure it's spraying cool. I'll go right over this design, just like this. And that's all I'm doing. I'm just hitting that silver stripe. I'm getting rid of that silver stripe. But I'm not burying it completely. I just want it to look like a lighter version of the blue around it. And the cool thing about doing this with candy is if you get a little overspray on the rest of the design, big deal. Doing this with opaques is a nightmare. You got to backmask everything because the opaque will just wipe out all your underlying color. Okay, we're going to let that go ahead and sit because I'm going to remask some areas on it, and that's wet right now. So we're going to let that sit for about 5 minutes before we unmask anything, because I don't want to get my fingers anywhere near it. Okay, as you see, we got this all nice and dry in here, and it's time to start pulling the other tape off. Again, you want to be real careful when doing this. We had real good luck. We didn't lift any paint with the other tape, but that is no excuse to start just hauling, just yanking the tape off. Right? A little added something I saw once on a bike, and I'm going to mask off the blue. Now, remember me telling you that you didn't need to mask off blue when using those transparents. You didn't need to do all that back masking. Well, I'm masking this off for a different reason. I'll show you when we actually unmask the whole final piece. I'm going to go over and just lay this blue fine line exactly over the last design we did. This is another reason why I wanted to wait until that first color was nice and dry, that candy, because I knew I was going to tape immediately afterwards. And you tape on wet paint, you're not going to have any luck. Real careful. Don't want to press it down real hard. I don't want to stretch it real hard. We're not turning curves here, so there's no need to stretch this blue fine line. It's also a good example on, if you look at designs on helmets, there's a whole lot of designs that are 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch. Coincidentally, the exact same widths as the standard tapes out there today. Never make your life more difficult than it has to be. I use a heck of a lot of tape widths in proportion to my graphic designs. Patterns like this and backmasking and little things you can do with your tape, something you can just goof around with in your spare time. You'd be surprised, goofing around with tape and spraying and doing different layers, this type of multiple layering. It's kind of cool because you can come up with all kinds of different designs just by messing around with it. Half of them you couldn't even plan ahead of time. You just kind of come across them. It's the key to custom painting, is constantly experimenting. If you don't find yourself experimenting at least a little bit every day, you're not going to be coming up with the best designs. Run my finger lightly over to make sure it's at least pressed down. I don't want any bleeds going through it. And we're going to come back in with our transparent blue. Give it a good shake. Make sure it's spraying okay. This is the blue that has no pearl in it. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to go back over. And you're going to have to remember now, since I can't see any of the previous color, I want to make sure I'm doing at least about the same color. And I remember it was 2 good passes. If you can't remember, or let's say you're doing this the next day, you might want to lift a little bit of tape and make sure that your color underneath is similar to the one you're spraying now, because you don't want each direction to look like a different color. Now I do this same grid effect with tape when I'm doing like a helmet that looks like a globe. Gives those nice latitude and longitude line effects. Looks real complicated, like you did all kinds of maskings. People always assume you masked off each checker. They don't think of you laying out a grid over an underlying color. Get these too dark. I'm just trying to get them close to what I remember the underlying ones being. I'll take a little bit of a peek. Yeah, just right. Make sure I got them all equally done. Make sure you don't miss any. Sometimes you'll miss an area because it's near an edge and you think there's no paint there. Also, don't waste your time painting over on tape. Give it a good once over. And it's time to unmask it. A little bit down there just for added measure. Now, when you unmask it, it's kind of cool. You got a neat little surprise underneath there. Got a little square pure silver that's left in there because of the way I cross the tape over. People will be looking at this and thinking you cut out little bitty 1/8 squares and sprayed silver. Well, let them think that. Okay, I got this area unmasked here. I still left this area masked up because that's where our checkers are going to be. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in and mask off a design. I'm just going to do a thin stripe graphic coming from here and coming from here, both sides using the blue fine line tape. So we'll have like a green border on both sides of whatever I end up doing in the center. Using this silver as much as possible because the silver is going to be a really cool underlying metallic. I'll bring this down to a similar point that I did before. Snap that tape off there. This grid makes it even easier to lay the tape on because I can see the center point because it's pointed to right, by that one center line on the grid. And this is going to be our green line, this area right in here. So I'm going to have to come back in, get a little flake off of there. I'm going to come in there and mask this off and leave this masked. I'm also going to do a similar green line on the bottom down here. I want it to be the same thickness, approximately. And I'm also going to bring it down, use my masking tape as a little stand here. Right like that. And line up that center point that I have. Now at this point, if you get a little bit off on your center points, when we come in and pinstripe this, we can also come in and hide that with a pinstripe edge. Don't press down real hard when laying this over your silver, because you may want to change your mind on it. When you press down hard, it kind of burnishes the tape in. It's pressure sensitive tape. And you press down hard, it may lift up some of the paint, but it also may leave some glue behind. As soon as you're happy with the design, you can then press it down to burnish it in. I'm pretty happy with the design. So now I'm going to come in with some masking tape and mask off. This is already masked, don't worry about that. Mask off the center. I'm going to leave the center silver and mask off the top as well. So when we come back, we'll have this all masked off and ready to spray. Okay, you see I've got the whole area masked off. It may look a little bit different. I want to change the pattern up a little bit, so I kept these lines, which were of course the bottom and top lines, and while this line continues the same, I rounded it in. This will give me some more area to work with and create two which will look like distinguishedly like different little panels on each side. Good example of how if you see something you want to change, you should have the freedom to be able to go in and change your design, not just stick rock solid to it. And it's nice and balanced there. What I've got mixed up is a transparent yellow candy. Be real careful when looking for transparent yellows. They're very difficult to find, and they oftentimes look orange. Matter of fact, in the bottle, it looks like orange to you, but when it's sprayed through an airbrush or very lightly, it is transparent. I want it to be transparent because I want the silver to show through. That's not showing through there. That is actually masked off still with the stretch mask. Spray it a little here. And then I'm going to come right in and start spraying. See how that orange color you saw in the bottle actually sprays out a yellow. I'm spraying very close, so I didn't need to mask this entire area off. And I lifted the tape a little bit high, so it'll create like a little overspray barrier. And I'm going to go all the way around and get all this yellow. And we're not going to keep this yellow. We're going to actually come in with some candy organic green and turn it into a green. The reason I put a yellow base on it first is we'll make the green really, really bright. And because if I left it yellow, I'd kind of blend in with my, my flame in the front. It almost looks like a gold color because of the metallic silver underneath. This yellow is great for any type of shading or coloring and doing portraits and murals. I do a lot of sunsets with this yellow. You'll notice the use of a transparent, you get really great color with very little build. And we're using that same silver underneath. So getting a lot of economy, a lot of mileage out of that silver base coat we've had down there the whole time. Okay, after letting this dry a little bit, I'm going to come in with my stencil. What I've got right here is an Art Tool pre-cut stencil. These are actually available through your Iwata Medea distributor. It is laser cut and is solvent proof, so I'm not going to have any problems with wrinkling. Be really careful when making stencils on your own that you're not going to have something that's going to wrinkle, bond, or have a reaction to the solvents. And I'm going to use a transparent green candy to do the, I'm not going to use any of this stuff over here, I'm just going to use the bamboo pattern. I'm going to give a weird bamboo shape across the whole design. Now, be careful not to use an opaque green at this, because if you use opaque green, you're really wasting that great yellow we have underneath here. I've got a nice transparent green that I got from my local paint distributor. You can get it from your local MSD Wada company that distributes paint. Again, it's automotive urethane. And I'm going to pull it away. We'll see how the effect's coming along. See, I just want something real nice and subtle, and then blow a little air on it to dry it off. And I'll come in and continue spraying, but I'll change the direction of it. So you'll kind of back and forth, back and forth. It'll give like a jungle effect with this bamboo. Pretty cool effect. Looks good over large areas, and as you can tell, it looks good even over small areas, little half-inch areas in here. Candies will spray on real wet. This is very similar to that blue candy I used up here above. So you want to give it some time. You want to spray it with some air, let it dry a little bit. Also make sure that the studio or whatever area you're working in is going to be warm enough. If you're spraying in a real cold area, the paint's going to take a long time to dry. And the downside to that is even if you're willing to wait the time, you could actually damage your paints by spraying them in too cold of weather, because the solvents won't let them set properly. And as long as candy takes to dry, it takes longer with an airbrush, because remember, we've reduced it down almost double. Okay, after getting the entire stencil laid out on here, I'm going to come in and add a little bit more green. I want this to be a little bit more green than it actually is. So more of that yellow is showing through. I'm never going to be able to cover that yellow completely, because this is a candy just like the yellow. As a matter of fact, if you see me spraying directly over, it doesn't even cover the stencil, it just darkens it up a bit. By doing this, I get a nice, really brilliant green that when the light hits it, it's just going to really play nice. I'm going to darken the top of each of these. Leave a couple of little areas pure gold like back in here. Spray a little bit of air and paint, a little bit of air first, then some paint so I don't get too wet. But the more candy you layer in here, the darker the green is going to be. As long as you keep it partially light, but not getting too heavy coats on there, it'll give you a real brilliant color, because that light will just come right through. Again, for this kind of light fading and real fine gradation, airbrush is the perfect tool. You want to be real careful not to get a run at this point. Don't get it too wet that it runs. If you get a run, you'll see it. A candy run appears real dark, so take your time. Slow layers are the way to build up color with an airbrush. And that's about it. Ran out of paint just about the time I was going to finish my fade anyway. So last little air on it to surface dry it. Don't want any dust sticking to it. And then we're going to let that sit for a couple minutes before I unmask and then remask the area and spray in my little panels on both sides here. Paint's not dry enough to tape on, but it is definitely dry enough for me to unmask and get my fingers in near it. I like to unmask the tape while it's still slightly tacky, because then the paint will have a tendency of rolling on the edge. If you wait until it's completely dry before you unmask, you can get a real sharp edge to the paint. And that real sharp edge can cause some problems down the road, especially with pinstriping. And I'm also being careful to lift all the masking tape off without taking my stretch mask with it, because I still got some plans for the stretch mask to stay on here. So that's why I'm lifting from the back side, because I noticed I'm lifting my stretch mask on that area right there. So I'm going to come from the front. The time you start lifting, don't start picking at it. Come from the back side. Unmask it backwards. Then I can come in and press that stretch mask right back down. See? It stays back down there just fine. But if I came in and started picking at it and got my finger oils on that, oh yeah, you'd have all kinds of problems with that stretch mask sticking back down again. Once it gets overspray or oil, any kind of contamination, it doesn't want to stick. see now the cool little panel that I left for myself on the inside of the green. I'm going to go ahead and mask this area off after it just gets a little bit drier, and then we'll be spraying in this silver. The last thing we're going to do is going to be our checkers down here. So giving this about 15 minutes to flash off on us. Candy takes a little bit longer to dry than base coat, standard opaque base coats. And got back my blue fine line tape. And I'm going to back mask this whole silver design here. Again, I'm not worried about the yellow scallop, those shreds, because they're still masked off with the stretch mask. Just kind of follow along the edge. When doing this, the best way to do it is to leave a little bit of green showing. That way you know you're not going to have, you have a little bit of overlap. That way you don't have a silver gap that pops up in the middle, even though we are going to pinstripe this when it's all said and done. And I'll butt up to get this against this blue tape with some masking tape. I want to do as little cutting as possible on the direct surface. When you see me lay tape on and do cutting, it's usually cutting right over the blue fine line. I use the blue fine line as a buffer. And just take my 2-inch masking tape, which I'm going to dull the tape. You can do that on your pant legs or a shirt, any lint or anything on there. You don't want to get dirt on it, but just a little bit of dulling will make that tape not stick as much. Added precaution on fresh paint. Kind of bring it here, and I'm going to tear it, and then kind of fold it over like that. And this way, I can actually create what's called an overspray barrier. Create a little high wall there, because I'm just going to be spraying it here. I don't need to mask the entire area off. I'm going to blue fine line this side, and then get it all masked off, and I'll be ready to spray my final graphic in these two little panels. I'm going to come and take some black base coat. This is opaque base coat, exact same stuff you'd use on any automotive application. Make sure it is base coat like I've been using throughout this entire design. Again, it's double reduced down. You may have to run it through a strainer to get all the small bits of pigment out. The reason being is we're going to go to a little bit of a different gun here. Looks, of course, similar to the last gun I was using. This one right here is a Micron. It's actually the newest Micron in the line. It's a Micron C. It's got a special air valve adjuster down here. So if you listen, I can actually open this all the way out or dial it all the way down to no air pressure. So I can control not just my trigger pull and my paint, like on all other airbrushes, but this is one of the only airbrushes on the market where you can control the amount of air pressure right at your fingertips, right here. Very important for extremely fine detail work, because I'm going to be dropping this thing down to probably below 20 psi, right around there for the detail work. But I can also crank it up here to give me some coverage when I come in with my stencil. I'm going to use this to spray a stencil of bones throughout here in black. Since I got so many colors going on here, I'm going to do a nice monochromatic design. It's not going to compete with the black and white checkers because it's a silver. So it'll be silver and black, and this black will probably let a little bit of that silver through anyway. I'm going to use the stencil first, then dial the pressure down, and come in and do some fine detail work with the Micron. Here. If it's easier for you to use two hands, you may have to have someone help you, or may want to tape this down. I'm just going to kind of come in and press it. I'm just going to use it for a reference for these skulls. I'm not going to do it really intense, a lot of spraying, because I'm going to come in and freehand in the details. So I'm not that worried about how accurate this stencil is laid on here. Just hold it with my hand. Also, it's a curved surface. On a flat surface, this thing will stay still a lot better. Now, I'm not using the adhesive on the back. You can use it. Some people like putting adhesive on the back of their stencils. Only downside to that is you're going to get a little bit of that left behind. You may not see it. Now, if you're wondering which stencil this is, it's a fairly new one. It came out in the new Cursive Skullmaster. It's called Bones 2. It's actually a supplement to the original Bone stencil. I don't have to continue on from where I was at. If you want to, you can. I will just show you how. Line it back up. It's really easy. You can see it, just like line up any other stencil. And I can continue on from here as I rotate around to the side. This one I can come off to the edge. Remember, you want to be careful on stencils. I can come to the edge of this stencil because the stencil on the edge is an actual positive. It's part of the design still. It's not just a flat edge. So I can come all the way to the edge on this one if I want. I like this guy right here. And I can get a chance to show him on the other side. So I'll press it down. And I'm using the stencil not as a finished item. It's just going to be a sketch outline. I'm going to render in the details in a second. I like the way those teeth are on this guy too, so I'll use him. Even though you don't see the whole skull, Enough of the teeth show through, you can get an idea. Don't use too many big ones. You want to get some small ones in there too. I'm going to come in here with this one, and we're going to get a whole skull in right here. Get him to fit all the way in there. Make sure you pull right off. If your paint's wet, you're going to smear it if you slide it along. And then these small little gaps underneath, you can fill in with the little guys up on top. This stencil does work great in conjunction with the original bone stencil, which is actually similar to this, but a lot more smaller bones, a lot of other smaller ones in there. I like this guy because he's got some eyes like he's looking at that just, so I'm going to put him in here too. They're using the same stencil, you can get complete different looks. When this is all done, it won't look like it was done with a stencil. It'll look like it was free-handed in here. If you can freehand, that's cool. But let's say you got to freehand 10 helmets, and you want them all to be the exact same design. Well, this is going to give you the basis to make it very similar to the same design, so the 10 don't look completely different. So the stencils aren't just tools for beginners. They're tools for every level of airbrush artist out there. And right tool for the right job. So I'm done with my stencil, and I'm now going to come in and start freehanding the details. Give it a little bit of time to kick. The reason is, even though it wasn't that wet, I don't want to bump into it by accident with my hand and damage it. Plus the whole act of stenciling this whole piece, usually by the time you're done, you're dry. I'm going to start right here and start doing some of the detailing. Dial a little bit of pressure down on this, a little bit lower than where it was before. Now this micron is, you can see this can get some line work that is like seriously thin. It's like a balanced and blueprinted version of that gun right here. Plus it has a fixed tip aluminum alloy head. Or platinum alloy actually, sorry about that. And all I'm doing with this is really kind of redefining some of the stuff the stencil left for me here. Kind of darkening up the eye. Because I left everything's kind of a gray tint. I don't want to paint over all my silver. I'm just going to redefine some of the designs and try and make it look like it's freehand now. Using the stencil merely as a template for the overall design. And you can do this by simply moving the airbrush in and out. It's not just a combination of just trigger pull, it's also the distance the airbrush is to the surface. You want to take your time, be able to read your stencil, because some of the lines in your stencil might not make a lot of sense. Remember, the stencil has to be designed so it doesn't fall apart when you hold it. And because of that, you'll end up with some areas that aren't quite defined. You can add a couple of little bitty fine extra crack right in here on his head up in there. And I'm going to outline every little tooth. Now, if I was working on a very large area, like a graphic or a flame on a car, I would not do this much detail. This not a stencil for a background would actually be kind of cool. But the thing with Harleys and helmets is people tend to look at even the smallest little amount of detail. So this is where you kind of take your time. I'm going to define these teeth down here too. Notice I keep my air flowing. If you do this, when you're airbrushing, you'll build up a lot of paint on the tip. Get what's called tip dry. Bad technique. You don't want to get into that because you'll start having spitting and all kinds of clogging situations with any airbrush, especially with a micron. Micron's a little bit sensitive to that kind of stuff. And darken up a little bit of shadow there because that cheekbone's over the jaw right there. And then we'll bring that cheekbone in there. Darken up this side of the skull a little bit because it's more in shadow. I'm going to assume the light source is kind of, well, I'm not going to find a fixed light source. I just want to create depth right now. Towards the back of the skull. The light's towards the front, but this is on the back, so you've got a little bit of free reign on the light source here. As you kind of go along, you'll start picking up some speed when you get used to working with the detail on the gun. A couple little rings under his eyes right there, just add a little bit more detail. Take away that stencil effect. And what do we got going on here? Oh yeah, we got the top of the skull there. Actually, I'm going to turn it into, I can see a mouth right here, so I'm going to make this look like a mouth. You may see things in the stencils that really aren't there. Let's just go with the floor. The stencil is only used to give you initial layout. So all of a sudden I saw a jaw right in there, so I added some teeth. And shadow around it. Put the nose in there. And then darken this area up back here. Continue shading and shadowing as you go along. Little skull peeking out right over here. I'm going to clean him up a bit. You can always bring the stencil back over. If you have a hard time seeing what something is, you can kind of look at it and go, what the heck was I painting there? Oh yeah, that's what it is. See, in actuality, that right there was the crack to this guy's head, but it was off the picture, and I didn't want just some big, top of the head there. It's kind of boring, so change it up a little bit. I want to continue the same level of detail throughout the whole back piece. Plus, this is the fun part of airbrushing, so it shouldn't be that big a deal if it takes you a little bit longer. You enjoy this. Gives yourself a nice break from masking. A little bit of time taken at this step pays off in the long run. Big time. I'm also going to create a little bit of a shadow across this to make it look like that green graphic is casting a shadow over the whole design right there. See how the big difference between this and this. It looks like serious, a lot of freehand work in there, which there is, but that stencil will kind of keep your sanity as you're going along doing it. And give you that continuity you want to keep. So I'll continue doing this design all the way around the entire skull. Until the entire helmet with my skulls. And then as soon as I'm done, we'll unmask and we'll go on to the next step. You can see how I have a nice contrast between the blue, the green, and then we have a little bit of a shadow there from that. When I do the checkers down here, we're going to cast a shadow from this graphic. I want this graphic to look, it's above this, and this graphic is above everything. You have to think sequentially when you're unmasking and when you're masking, when you're laying out your graphics. Very similar to playing the game of chess. You want to visualize the end of your design. It's the same way a chess player visualizes the win or the final strategy. If you visualize the end of your design and how you want to lay it out and how you want to do it, you'll probably come across a lot of great shortcuts and you won't make mistakes as you go along. Biggest enemy of the custom painter is just turning your brain off when you're painting. Custom painting is definitely a thinking man's sport. So getting a nice contrast here. I didn't want to bring another color in here and just have it look way too, way too colorful. That black and white's going to play out real nice. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and unmask this bottom part that we've had masked the whole time. Remember, it's white underneath there still. Then we're going to come in and re-back mask this area in preparation for the checkers. So we'll come back as soon as I get everything masked and ready to start spraying. Okay, I've got all this area masked off now. Remember the blue fine line that I traced around the bottom of the green area? I then came in with a little bit of ammonia-proof glass cleaner, or ammonia-free. The reason I did that is any fingerprints or any little areas that were left on this gel coat surface, and this isn't just pure gel coat, it's gel coat with that adhesion promoter that we sprayed on here. We've got a little mark right here that was left where there was an emblem. Actually, I think it's part of a mold mark that normally is stickers put over or something. It kind of shows through there. So I'm going to make sure when I do my checkered layout, that's going to have a checker right on it. Now, on doing the checkers, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can lay out some tape and draw them out and cut them out. That's a lot of cutting, a lot of time. I found out that laying out a grid of tape is the best way to do it. I've got a bunch of 3/4 inch tape here. The green is nothing significant about it. There's green tape is used more in the refinish industry to help you know if you got good coverage when you're masking. I just happen to have some laying around. I laid it on this table to get a whole lot of lint on it so we are not going to have it too sticky. And I'm going to lay a strip right down the middle of this helmet. And I'm going to come in and continue to lay more strips down all the way around this helmet as we go along. As soon as I get this laid out, I'm going to come back with a cross grid, and we'll end up having a nice, like a basket weave grid effect that will then cut out when we come in to do our checkers. Okay, you see I got the nice grid going on here. You can just eyeball this. There's no need to really measure or anything. I just want to make sure that the gaps in between that I left are about approximately the same size as the 3/4 inch tape. You can eyeball that pretty closely. And you can do this grid pattern for checkers whether you want it on a car or a boat, anywhere from 3/4 inch tape to 1 to 2 inch to even 3 inch tape. This pattern technique is the best way to lay out checkers and get a real clean edge. What I'll do is every place where the tape doubles over, it's like right here where the tape is covered up, you can see the line. I'm going to follow that with my X-Acto knife, cut once, cut twice. I'm not cutting the tape double, I'm just cutting right where it ends, like that. And then I'm going to come in here and peel out that checker. That's how you do checkers perfectly without any outline that's going to, or any blue fine line tape that's going to leave gaps. Real nice precision little edge, because you're not cutting that little corner, you're just cutting straight through and you're using the actual grid of the tape to determine your checkerboard. Now, as you get near the scallop areas, you want to be careful not to cut through them because you'll see your X-Acto cuts, but you can see through this tape well enough to know where to cut and where not to. And you want to go through this entire design and do this. It takes a little bit of time, but I'll tell you something, it comes out really nice and clean. Heck of a lot easier than just freehand cutting out every single square. Because you only have to cut out half the number of squares. The other ones, the grid created. And see, that's like a machine, computer perfect checkerboard job just done with simple tape and a razor blade. So let me get all these things cut out and we'll get ready to spray in the black for our checkers. Okay, as you see, I've got all the checkers cut out and peeled. This is the point where you really want to go over the whole design and make sure you got every single little one lifted up. The pattern can kind of fool your eye, and it may not look like it's exactly even because of these shreds underneath. I didn't want to cut through them. Last thing you want to do is cut through these shreds because you'll see those X-Acto marks after you remove everything. Make sure everything's nice and pressed down. I'd already pre-cleaned the whole thing earlier, so I'm not worried about any adhesion now. And I got my Eclipse CS loaded up with some black base coat. Spray a little bit on the tape to make sure it's coming out good. That's cool. And I'm going to come right in and just start spraying these checkers. Now, I'm going to just hit it with like a medium coat. I'm not going to go for instant coverage because this paint will just get real wet with the airbrush and you might get a run or actually have the paint creep underneath the tape. So I'm going to hit it dry first, like a dry coat or a tack coat. And then when I finish the whole thing, I'll come back and hit it another time. And that second coat or third coat ought to get her nice and solid black. Checker's real nice. As you saw, it was a really easy design to do. The longest thing is really that's entailed is the masking part, but as far as spraying goes, very simple effect and reads real well from a distance. Want to save some time? You could also make the checkers a little bit bigger. We could have used inch wide or inch and a half wide tape for some big checkers. But you don't get that nice detail. Whenever I'm laying checkers, I make sure I at least have 3 checkers in a row. You want to know how big to make your checkers? If you're doing them so big you only get 2, it doesn't look good with only 2. At least 3 checker rows in any given direction is what you want to really give a realistic checker look. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's only half, so we'll count that. So I got a good 5 in here. That's cool. Make them too small and too tight, they don't read from a distance. There we go. I'll run my finger just lightly over to see if I have any tape left behind. You'll feel little bits of it. You don't want it on there. I wouldn't use pre-cleaner because if you accidentally smear some semi-wet paint with the black, it'll get right on that white and really mess it up for you. I'm going to let it kick a little bit longer before I actually come in and spray my fade. And as you can see, checkers are pretty much done. All we need now is the drop shadows and a little bit of a color fade in there. Okay, I also took that time while I was waiting for the paint to dry to clean out one of my guns, so I had another gun free for some color. Using the micron here, again, this is the detail gun. I'm not using it for detail in this case. I cranked the pressure up on it. I'm just using it to create some streaks. And this really is not to cover anything. I don't have any flaws. This is a great way to hide flaws in your checkers. But just to break it up a bit, I'm going to do a nice purple fade all on the bottom. This is a candy, or what you can call a transparent color. And the nice thing about the transparent color is you don't see it over the black because it's transparent, but you see it over the white, and it gives a real nice breakup of that white. And I'm going to do some streaks following the way the scallops were to kind of give a sense of motion. Almost kind of looks like a undulating flag if you do it right. And I'll do it from, see how it just breaks up that white that was real harsh and brings another color into the design. And very simple to do. Come in from this side, do the exact same thing. I got a little overspray on here because this thing will hold static electricity. See how a little overspray getting on there? That's just dust. It'll wipe off. I'm not concerned about that. But I don't want too much of this violet, just enough to work well with that orange. Violet and orange, while they don't look good when they're mixed together, they look very good side by side. They're good complementaries. That's all the violet I'm going to do on this. Put the violet down and actually switch over. Nice thing to have when airbrushing is a quick connect hose. You can get these from your local Nesty wadded distributor. Makes it a lot simple to be able to have one hose and just click all your airbrushes on and off of it. Take one of my towels right here. This violet's definitely dry by now, and just lightly kind of brush off any of that dry overspray that we saw on there. I don't want any of it being locked down by my drop shadow I'm going to do right now. As I'm not using any pre-cleaner, because the little fade I put on here is so minute and so delicate. Pre-cleaner just yanked that sucker right off. You don't want to do that. You can see the overspray coming off on the towel too. And that was just called solely by static, just from the air. And don't trip out about static. It happens, especially you got a fiberglass or composite helmet. You've got air from your airbrush. The air itself rushing over the surface will create static. Got my black in my gun, make sure it's spraying good. I'm going to come in and add a drop shadow right at the top of this design. Much nicer. And don't go crazy with the drop shadow. Remember, we got black and white checkers going on here. Too much black is just going to kill your design. So if you notice, I don't hit the shadow so dark it completely covers the black. The shadow is not necessarily absolutely black. It's just the absence of light in a certain area. And I will then do another shadow right underneath these scallops to show how these scallops are over the top of the checkers. It gives a nice 3D look to the whole design. And I'm pretty much done with that. I'm going to basically put this airbrush aside for a sec. Let this just kick. This is a little wet on top. These aren't, but this is. Let that kick for a second, then I'm going to unmask this whole design. And then the last bit of airbrushing I'm going to do would be the final shadows over the whole piece to give that dimensional pop to the scallops. And then we'll go ahead and finish unmasking and continue on with the striping. Got this all nice and unmasked, and very happy to see we had no lifting at all. Any little imperfections like that, which is really just a cut edge, that's going to be gone as soon as we come in and stripe it. These were drop shadowed from before, but I never came all the way in and hit the green areas. So this yellow right here is actually over the green as well. So I'm going to hit a little bit of a drop shadow there, and then kind of go around, just kind of peeking in. Remember, I got this one over here. If you got a problem on one side or a drop shadow you need on one side, there's a good possibility you're going to need it on the other too. And we got these drop shadows for all of these scallops. So I'm going to come in and start shadowing these. Make sure it's all pressed down. This one was giving me some problems earlier. It lifted on me because I pulled the tape backwards. So I press it down real good. And just lightly put that shadow in there. Same thing here, make sure this one's all pressed down. Come back in and hit that shadow. Same thing with this one. This one's in the center, so it gets a little shadow on one side, a little shadow on the other, and then one right down the middle, just a little bit, not much. Press that down a little bit there. This one's doing okay. I'm going to hit the shadow on this side. Same thing with this one. Same thing with this one. Just subtle shadows like that are going to make a real big difference when we unmask the whole thing. And especially when it's pinstripe. You may not even notice it as much when we unmask it because the edges aren't really popping right now. But as soon as we pinstripe it, all these graphics are going to pop separately. Go ahead and start slowly pulling some of our stretch mask. I'm trying to find the edge here. It's kind of funny, this stuff's been wanting to pull the whole time when we've been playing with our tape, and the one time you try and pull it, you can't find the edge. Pull it real carefully. Because of all the cutting we did, we got a little bit of a loose edge around here. That's cool. This kind of edge, if this is going to not be pinstriped, that would be an issue. But guess what? That's the reason that most people do pinstriping. Pinstriping hides tape edges. None of us are perfect. Even little bleeds, like the black that got in there, that little white there, it's all going to be hidden with the pinstripe. Make sure all of that stretch mask is up. This is a high-performance vinyl, or a mylar, and because of that, it does have a chemical inside of it that allows it to remain flexible. If you trap this underneath when you clear coat it, it's going to eat its way through just like a sticker on a factory motorcycle, tend to lift after a while underneath the clear. Make sure you brush off any excessive little pieces there. I'm going to take my time doing this. You don't want to rush it now and cause any lifts or anything, so let me go ahead and get this all unmasked. When we come back, we'll be ready to start striping. Okay, as you can see, we've gotten this all completely unmasked, and those few little areas that we had some lifting on, completely touched them up with the airbrush. Again, nice thing having a small detail gun here. We can do all the small red and orange, and you can't even see where those chips were. And wipe the whole thing down, make sure we got any excess paint that was hanging on out of there, and we're ready to start striping. Now the first color I'm going to do is actually going to be this one in here. And usually you want to work from the back forward. In this case, this line are about the same level. This line is the top line. This is the last one we're going to do, is going to be the scallops. So we're going to do the inside here, and I want to do it like a blue. If I was going to do it in orange, I'm going to do an orange also. It's going to be orange, blue, and green. If we did blue here, it would bump into this. So we do blue here, it'll be nice border. The orange will be nice right in here and here. And then we'll do a lime green. It's going to go around that. It's going to come out really nice. What I got here is some House of Color striping urethanes. Very important to use a urethane striping system when you're going to be clear coating, because the enamel systems, like the oil base or the alkyd enamels, they have a tendency of reacting with clears. So I prefer to use the urethane striping paints. And I got a nice little Excalibur pinstriping brush here. You can use a Mac. Excalibur is a little bit better for tight curves, and since I got a couple of tight corners in here and I'm not pulling long straight lines like what the Mac is designed for, the Excalibur is going to work good. It'll work good just for the small line work I have here, the few short lines, and it's really good for the slash line that I'm going to do around these scallops here. Grabbed a couple old brochures here, and I got a cup with some reducer. You can use the striping reducer that comes with House of Color. It tends to slow the paint down, which is good for pulling long lines. I want this paint to dry pretty fast, and I had some reducer from my base coat laying around, so I was able to use that instead. You don't need to use catalyst with striping urethanes, but if you got a real heavy hand when you're clear coating, you may want to put a drop or two in the reducer because it'll lock the color in. If you got a clear coater that just lays on the clear and it's just like this far from running, you might end up with some color pulling because all that amount of reducer in the clear can start to reactivate even these urethanes. Cool thing about these is because they are urethane, they're completely compatible with clears, And literally, you could clear them when they're still wet. I don't recommend it though, but you can. Now I'm gonna get this helmet situated so it's pretty stable. Normally I sit at my lap. This is a good angle right here. I'm gonna come in with the brush and just start I'm gonna hold the brush sideways and start a line right around here. As I come to the curve, I spin the brush slightly to hug that curve. And then stop before the brush flips out or before your wrist breaks off. For the continuing line, I'm going to kind of pick the helmet up here. Make sure you have no paint on your hands. That's always a big no-no. And I'm going to bring this brush in, starting from where I left off. I'll have to go in there and clean it up a little bit. This helmet's so lightweight, it wants to jump on me, so I'm going to have to put tension on it and press it against my leg. I come down with my line, just straddling that edge, straddling that paint edge. All the way down until I come to that scallop, and I stop before I actually get into it. I try and keep my lines right around the same as the 1/8 inch, actually a little bit smaller than 1/8 inch, as you can tell. Now this paint dries fast. We're talking like a matter of maybe 5 or 10 minutes before I could actually touch that again. And because it dries so fast, I'm going to let it sit while I clean this brush and go to my next color. That way I don't have to risk because I'm going to be moving the helmet around the same way with the next color. I don't want the blue to get over my pants. Worst, I don't want it to damage and blot out. Even if you just touch this blue when it's wet, that fingerprint you leave in it will show later when you clear. So we'll come back in a few minutes and I'll be all ready to come in with the next color, which is going to be orange. Okay, we've given ourselves a little bit of time for that to set up, so if we touch it, we're not going to smear any of the blue paint. I took a combination of the House of Color Orange and House of Color Bright Yellow and mixed it together to give myself a little bit of a brighter orange. This orange is a little bit too dark for me. I wanted it to kind of punch a little bit right off of that green. Again, it's a good example of a complementary color where you have orange and green really, and blue really doing nicely together. Orange and green don't do well when mixed together, but when side by side really play off each other well. I'm going to take my brush and the same thing I did before, get the brush nice and wet with reducer and dip it in paint and just palette it. This paletting not only helps me load the brush with paint so it'll pull a nice even line, but it also will give me an idea on the consistency of the paint. If it feels too stiff, then it's a little bit too thick. Add some more reducer. If it's too sloppy, you dip in the paint and make it a little bit thicker. And you don't want too much. You can tell by looking at the side of it. It's too bold out with paint, it's going to drip on you. If it doesn't have enough paint, it's going to dry brush on you. Make sure nothing's on my hand. I go ahead and grab this helmet and do the same thing I did before. I'm going to put a little tension on the helmet itself and then pull a line along this orange, along the green with the orange. And continue pulling this until I come all the way down to my scallop. Right there. Bingo. Because I had black underneath, you can see a little bit of the black peeking out of the orange. I'll come back and hit this line one more time to get rid of that peak. The reason we have a peak at all is because remember this was silver, yellow, and then green, and a little bit of an edge showing between the checkers and that. But that'll work out fine. That orange will stand out real nice against it, especially when clear coat. You have to realize this helmet may have a lot of weird shines to it and angles you're looking at, and it's like kind of modeled. Well, it's not clear coated yet. As soon as we get clear coated, it'll besides being shiny, the colors will just come alive. You gotta realize these colors are actually dull compared to the way they're gonna look when it's cleared. This helmet will literally look neon almost by the time it's clear coated. Move positions here. I'm trying to get this so the camera can see it. Normally I'm not this awkward when striping. In striping you should do whatever is comfortable. The more comfortable you are, the better your line is going to be. Of course, if you got a video camera in front of you, you got to play to the camera slightly. And there we go. See how that orange just pops? It looks like a totally different color. This orange here and this orange here pops against that blue real nice. Start it right here. And I'm going to come right along the green very carefully. I'm going to clean up this tip down here. I'll do that by working it back and forth until I get the tip nice and pointy. And I'll continue on to this side and finish out striping that side with the orange. And then come back a little bit over any of the peaked areas when I'm done. Okay, giving this a little bit of time to kick off, like we said, I also took the chance to clean my brush out and mix up some green. I have some house color green and that same bright yellow I used in the orange. By mixing it together, get a real bright lime green. This green is a little bit too dark for this design, and that lime green is really going to kick off. Plus, it'll complement. It'll bring the same green we have back here up into the scallops. So I'm going to start paletting again with this brush. And there might be a little bit of orange left in it, so paletting also kind of helps work that green in and get rid of any orange that may be left behind. Get this nice and paletted. I want this to be a little bit wetter than normal because when the paint's really stiff, it'll pull a long, clean line. What I'm going to do is a little bit different. It's called a slash stripe. Let me demonstrate it real quick. I'm going to bring this helmet down here so I can do it easier and you can see it better. Since I got an erratic edge here, I'm going to come along, start from the center point, and move over and do a slash, and then another slash, and then continue slashing it and it gives it kind of a rough hewn look. Some people say it looks like hair or grass or even barbed wire if you do it the right way. It just gives a rough, kind of radical texture, which works out really nice in contrast to all the perfect lines underneath it with that blue. Plus the green looks really great against the yellow and the orange. I'll continue this slash style all around all the scallops. Again, I'm holding the brush slightly in an unorthodox way compared to most striping, but this is also an unorthodox type of striping technique. When you do a design like this and you have like maybe 3 or 4 color graphics, I don't recommend doing this slash on every graphic. It'll look too much. You want to do it as like an option. You know, one color, maybe get a slash. And it's a great way of cleaning up any bad lines you may have. A little bad edge, you have some chips along the side, the slash stripe really hides it great. So I'm going to continue doing this stripe effect as I go along. Keep it looking organic, real random. You don't want to make it too orderly. That barbed wire effect is very similar to this, but you make it look orderly, like every so often you do a little X in it, or you can actually get a quill brush and render the barbed wire itself. I've done that with silver quite a lot on trucks. Like a pinstripe that turns into barbed wire. It's pretty cool looking. Anything your imagination comes up with works real nice when custom painting. Plus, let's say you don't know how to stripe. You're just an airbrusher or a painter. It's a great way to get into striping because I tell you, most people that can't stripe can still do this. This is not so much a technique that's skilled, but it's a design. The way it looks is more important than how perfect your striping is. So if you've got a good sense of artistic style and you're a good airbrusher, you probably will be good at slash striping, even if your pinstriping skills aren't that great. Because this is more geared along the lines of form and not necessarily a skilled technique. And just keep doing that until you go all the way around. See how nice that contrast against the background really makes it stand out. And then when it's clear coat, that's really going to punch. And the final thing we want to do, got the striping all on there. It's still wet, so I'm being kind of cautious with it. I'll come in and do a real quick signature. Don't have my lettering quill with me, but doesn't mean you can't sign it with a pinstriping brush. Get it nice and wet first. And throw the signature on the back. Luckily, the slash style of signature will work fine for this type of painting because that's about the only kind you're going to get out of this brush. Hi, my name is Craig Fraser. I'm here to introduce to you the complete automotive line of products from Iwata and Medea. First we're going to start out with is the LPH 400. This is a full-size automotive spray gun using LV technology. This LV technology allows the gun to pre-atomize the paint before it hits the air horns and turns into a fan. This gives better paint dispersion and better material transfer efficiency. The gun is also HVLP legal and is legal in all 50 states. This gun with the gravity feed center post cup holds quite a bit of material and is highly recommended for clear coating and large automotive applications. The second gun I'm going to show you is the LPH 100. This is a specialty gun designed for base coating and candy application. Notice it has a side feed, unlike the center post of the last gun, and the side feed is adjustable, so you can spray down as well as up for hard to get to places. It also has a number of different cup sizes for different applications, depending on large or if you want to have small for small material. It is also LV compatible, and it has the same technology of pre-atomization. As well, it has a Teflon seated headpiece that basically you can spin to accommodate different fan patterns easily. This is the LPH 50. This is the world's smallest HVLP gun. This gun is excellent for hard to get to places such as door jams or even doing small graphics such as ones on helmets or tanks. It is also a side feed, so it has the adjustability of the previous gun I showed you, and it also has different cups that it can come in. It is HVLP, so it is also legal in all 50 states, an excellent gun for automotive custom application. Let's move on from the spray guns and go to Iwata Medea's high-performance line of airbrushes. This right here is the HPC. This is one of the benchmark airbrushes from Iwata Medea and is one of the finest airbrushes in the illustration world today. It also is excellent for automotive use. It comes with a platinum alloy fixed tip that's 0.3 millimeter in size. Very good for spraying fine details as well as gradated fade patterns. Moving up the line, we have a similar airbrush, but this one is called the CMC Micron. This gun is very similar to the last gun, but because of its hand-assembled fine craftsmanship and complete matched head, it is a very fine precision instrument. Will produce the finest lines known and still works great for automotive paint. Comes complete with Teflon O-rings and solvent-resistant parts. An improvement to the CMC Micron is the new Micron that has not only full Teflon, but also has this adjustable air valve down below. This makes it even more versatile for the airbrush artist in the fact that besides being able to control your amount of trigger pull and paint and air, you now can control the volume of air as well, whereas before you would have to do this from the regulator on the compressor. Let's move on to the Clips line of airbrushes from Iwata Medea. This right here is the Clip CS. This is a great overall workhorse for the automotive industry, probably the one airbrush I use the most in my shop. It has a free-floating HUD nozzle that has a platinum alloy insert that's 0.35 millimeter in size. It can do incredibly fine detail, but also will actually move more volumes of paint than a 0.5 millimeter bottle feed gun. This gun right here can not only spray great details, but can also spray metallics, micas, and even ice pearls with little problem where smaller airbrushes have a real problem pushing those materials through. The next gun in line is the Clips BCS. This is a bottom feed gun, operates on a siphon feed principle unlike the gravity feed guns I showed you earlier. With a simply attached bottle, you can get different size bottles for different size jobs. The gun itself is excellent for large scale work or work where you'd have quite a bit more paint than would fit in the normal gravity feed guns. This gun also has a free floating head nozzle that's 0.5 millimeter in size without the platinum alloy tip. It still does excellent amount of detail work, but it's great for blasting long fades and gradations in graphics. The final series in the line is the Revolution. This is a rather new gun from Iwata. This gun right here comes in the same configuration as the earlier HPC and the CS series. The difference between this gun and the others is it's more of an economy model. It also sprays a lot larger volume of paint, has a larger nozzle, and it is fixed, but not as fine as the previous guns. Still capable of doing very good detail work. It's a great student model and good beginning airbrush for anyone that wants to get into this industry.